In previous chapters, we saw how Steve Jobs became the czar of the music industry with the iPod and the iTunes Store. But don't forget, he had another identity, one he poured just as much effort into, the head of Pixar Animation Studios. In the mid-2000s, Pixar was at the peak of its creativity and box office success. Movies like Finding Nemo were famous all over the world. However, behind this glory, the relationship between Pixar and its distribution partner, Disney, had reached the edge of a cliff. A divorce of the century was inevitable. All these conflicts pointed to one person, Michael Eisner, the then CEO of Disney. In Jobs' eyes, Eisner was an arrogant, short-sighted tyrant who only wanted to squeeze the value out of Pixar. Their conflicts showed up in every little detail. First, there was the definition of sequels. According to the original agreement, Pixar was to make several movies for Disney. After Toy Story 2 was a huge success, Eisner shamelessly claimed that sequels didn't count towards the number of films stipulated in the contract. This made Jobs feel publicly humiliated and deceived. Second, there was the public disrespect. In interviews, Eisner always attributed Pixar's success to Disney's marketing, as if Pixar was just a group of technicians who could draw. This view deeply hurt Jobs, who regarded creativity and talent as the lifeblood of the company. The final straw that broke the camel's back was when Eisner set up an animation department called Circle 7. The only task of this department was to make cheap sequels of classic films like Toy Story 3 and Monsters, Inc. 2 without Pixar's consent. For Jobs and Pixar's creative team, it was like watching their own children about to be kidnapped and mistreated, an absolutely intolerable line to cross. After an extremely insulting contract renewal negotiation in January 2004, Jobs ran out of patience. He publicly announced that Pixar would break off all negotiations with Disney. After finishing the last contracted film, Cars, Pixar would look for a new distribution partner. This was like dropping a bombshell in Hollywood. Everyone thought Jobs was crazy. Leaving Disney's distribution network, they believed, would be a death sentence for Pixar. But Jobs was willing to take the huge risk rather than bow to humiliation and betrayal. Jobs' rift eventually became one of the many straws that broke Eisner's back. After a series of internal struggles, Eisner was forced to step down. Replacing him was the company's second-in-command, a guy named Bob Iger. Iger was the exact opposite of Eisner. He was humble, sincere, and full of respect for creativity. He knew that saving the declining Disney animation was his top priority after taking office. And to achieve that, he had to repair the relationship with Pixar. So, as soon as the news of his appointment as the next CEO was announced, the first call he made was to Steve Jobs. On the phone, Iger put his attitude very low. He said, "Steve, I know there have been a lot of unpleasant things between us, but I really hope to have a talk with you." Jobs agreed. During their first meeting, Iger didn't make any excuses for Disney. He openly admitted, "I think Disney animation has lost its way, and our works lacked soul." He even asked Jobs what he thought of Disney's current situation. Jobs was not polite either. He spent a long time scolding all of Eisner's misdeeds and how Disney was stifling creativity. Throughout the whole process, Iger listened attentively and kept nodding in agreement. This rare respect and honesty instantly won Jobs' favor. He found that the man in front of him was someone he could talk to on an equal footing. As trust grew between the two, Iger realized that a new distribution contract alone couldn't mend the rift between them, let alone save Disney. He needed Pixar's DNA, its very soul. So, at a team meeting, Iger dropped a bombshell, a crazy idea that left everyone gobsmacked. Why don't we just buy Pixar? When Iger pitched this idea to Jobs, Jobs fell into deep thought. What worried him was Pixar's long-term future. How much longer could he steer the ship? Without him, would Pixar's culture survive? Merging with Disney could be Pixar's best bet if it could keep its independence and cultural integrity intact. What's more, this deal would make him Disney's largest individual shareholder, giving him unparalleled sway in the world's biggest content realm. Jobs saw this acquisition as a way to safeguard Pixar's future, like entrusting a beloved child, not just a regular business deal. He laid down some non-negotiable rules. Creative leadership. John Lasseter and Ed Catmull had to jointly lead Disney Animation. Brand autonomy. The Pixar brand and its Emeryville headquarters had to stay independent, free from Disney's cultural influence. Cultural foundation. Pixar's creative-driven work style had to remain unchanged. Iger agreed to all the conditions. In the end, Disney snapped up Pixar for a whopping $7.4 billion in an all-stock deal, stunning the world. At Disney's board meeting, Roy Disney, the late founder, Walt Disney's nephew, an old man who'd once vehemently opposed Eisner, voted yes with tears in his eyes. He believed this merger was a true return of the Disney spirit. After the deal was done, Jobs held 7% of Disney's shares, becoming its largest individual shareholder and a board member. John Lasseter and Ed Catmull took the reins at Disney Animation, kicking off a revival with movies like Tangled and Frozen. For Jobs himself, this move was far more than just about movies. It was the crowning achievement of his digital hub grand strategy. Look at his empire. He had Pixar and Disney to create content, the iTunes Store and Apple retail stores to distribute it, and the iPod and Mac computers to play it. From hardware to software, from distribution channels to content, Jobs finally built a perfect, self-contained digital content ecosystem with supreme power. Through this unprecedented union of Silicon Valley and Hollywood, he not only saved Pixar's future and Disney's soul, but also catapulted Apple to a whole new unrivaled level. He was no longer just the music-loving guy. He'd become the king of the entire digital entertainment world. In 2005, Apple was in its golden age. The iPod was the undisputed king, ruling the entire music world. But Steve Jobs, the CEO, always full of paranoia and a sense of crisis, smelled a whiff of danger from this prosperous scene. He keenly realized that there was a product that might completely take the iPod's market share in the future, and that was the mobile phone. The birth of the iPhone stemmed from two basic emotions. The first was fear. Jobs saw that mobile phones on the market were starting to integrate cameras and music playing functions. He knew that people would always choose to carry only one device. As long as the music function of the mobile phone was good enough, the end of the iPod would come. He would never allow Apple to be disrupted by others. Only Apple itself could disrupt itself. The second was disgust. Jobs and all his executives deeply despised the mobile phones at that time. Whether it was Motorola's or RZR or the BlackBerry, in his eyes, they were all ugly junk controlled by operators, with a terrible software experience and stupid plastic keyboards. He thought, we can make something 1,000 times better than these. But how to do it specifically? Inside Apple at that time, there were actually two secret R&D directions. The first was to build a keyboard-less tablet. A small team was researching a technology called multi-touch, which allowed you to type directly on the screen. This tablet project inadvertently sowed the first seed for the later iPhone. After Jobs decided to make a mobile phone, the company quickly split into two opposing teams, codenamed P1 and P2. The P1 project was the iPod faction, led by Tony Fadell, the father of the iPod. Their approach was relatively conservative: turn the iconic click wheel of the iPod into a virtual dial pad and add phone functions to the iPod. It was like putting a phone vest on the heroic iPod. The P2 project was the Mac faction, led by software director Scott Forstall. Their idea was much crazier. Shrink the powerful Mac OS X computer operating system and stuff it into a mobile phone. Then operate it with that revolutionary multi-touch screen still under development. Jobs let the two teams have a duel. When he saw the P1 team clumsily simulating old-fashioned phone dialing with the iPod wheel, he thought it was stupid. And when Forstall's team demonstrated multi-touch to him, although the prototype was crude, the inertial scrolling and rebound effect when sliding the list on the screen with fingers were so smooth and natural that he instantly saw the future. He made a decision: kill the P1 project and bet all on P2. This was a huge risk because it meant they had to almost start from scratch and invent a brand new way of interaction. All right, here's the deal. The real hellish R&D started right at this moment. The whole project was named Project Purple, and it took place in a locked-down building codenamed Purple Dorm. The pressure was off the charts, and the air was filled with the smell of caffeine and gunpowder. They were facing at least 3 Mission Impossible tasks. First up, they had to invent that special feel. Joni Ive's team had to design a perfect glass front with no buttons at all. And the software team? They had to come up with all those gestures we take for granted today, like pinching to zoom photos, swiping to unlock, tapping to open. Steve Jobs was crazy about that feel. He'd make engineers work all night to rewrite code. Just because the bounce effect at the end of a scrolling list didn't feel natural enough. Next, they had to create that amazing glass. The original prototype had a plastic screen, but after Steve Jobs put it in his pocket with keys for a day, the screen was all scratched up. He was furious. "I'm not selling a scratched-up piece of junk," he roared. During a late-night meeting, he remembered a glass company called Corning. He called Corning's CEO, Wendell Weeks, and told him to restart a super hard glass technology invented in the 60s but never mass-produced, and supply it to him in 6 months. Weeks said it was impossible, but Jobs, in his no-nonsense tone, said, "Don't be scared. You can do it." And Corning did it. That technology became the famous Gorilla Glass. Then they had to tame the giants. Back then, it was the carriers, like a T&T, that decided what a phone looked like and what it could do. Jobs had a revolutionary idea. He wanted an exclusive deal with singular later AT&T. The catch was, the carrier couldn't interfere with the phone's design, couldn't pre-install any junk software, and just had to provide the network for the iPhone. In return, the iPhone would bring them a huge number of data-hungry users. After countless tough negotiations, Singular's executives took a huge career risk and agreed to Jobs' unheard of overbearing terms. On January 9, 2007, at the Macworld conference, Jobs, in his iconic black outfit, stepped onto the stage. He rehearsed like crazy for this moment because the iPhone prototype in his hand was so fragile that engineers even set up a golden path to ensure a successful demo. Under the spotlight, he dropped that world-changing line. Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products: a touch-screen, widescreen iPod, a revolutionary phone, and a breakthrough internet device. An iPod, a phone, an internet communicator. Got it? These aren't 3 separate devices. It's one. We call it iPhone. Confusion turned into a frenzy in an instant. The applause and screams filled the venue. For over an hour after that, Jobs was like a miracle worker on stage. The visual voicemail made voicemails as easy to check as emails. Pinching to zoom photos and web pages made the audience gasp. The full version Safari loaded the New York Times website smoothly. Every single demo hit the weak spots of all the phones at that time. At that moment, the era of Nokia, BlackBerry, and Motorola came to an end. The birth of the iPhone was way more than just a product success. It was the crystallization of Steve Jobs' lifelong philosophy. The seamless blend of hardware and software. The meeting point of technology and humanity, and the ultimate form of the digital hub strategy. It didn't invent new things from scratch, but it put everything together perfectly, creating an amazing experience like never before. On this day, Apple reinvented the phone, and the world was changed forever. We witnessed the birth of the iPhone, a revolutionary product that catapulted Apple to the pinnacle of the world. But behind the glory of victory, a demon that Steve Jobs thought he had defeated was quietly returning, ready to launch a deadly second-round attack. The story began at the 2008 Apple Worldwide Developers Conference, WDC. That day, Jobs was about to unveil the iPhone 3G and the revolutionary App Store. It should have been another shining moment for him. However, when he stepped onto the stage in his black turtleneck and jeans, the flashing lights and cheers in the whole venue were instantly replaced by shock and concern. The man on the stage was emaciated, with sunken cheeks, as if a gust of wind could blow him down. The once powerful Jobs, who could distort reality, looked extremely weak and haggard. The next day, the photos of the gaunt Jobs spread all over the world, and Apple's stock price plummeted. The media and the public were all frantically asking the same question: had his cancer recurred? In the face of outside speculation, both Apple and Jobs himself built a strong wall of secrecy. The company first issued a statement saying that the CEO had just suffered from a common minor illness. Then they came up with the excuse of hormonal imbalance. These vague explanations only intensified the market panic. Jobs himself was furious about the prying into his health condition. He thought it was the most blatant violation of his privacy. He roared at his friends, "It's none of anyone's business." He even showed a strong-willed denial to his closest family members and colleagues. He still worked like a madman, trying to use his familiar reality distortion field to block out the dangerous signals from his own body. But the truth can't be hidden by lies and willpower. The fact is, the pancreatic tumor that he had delayed for 9 months in 2004 by refusing timely surgery and relying on a vegetarian diet and herbal remedies had come back. The cancer cells had metastasized and taken root in his liver. He was losing weight rapidly because the cancer cells were devouring the protein in his body, and his body was being eaten away bit by bit. Doctors were desperately trying to design a nutrition plan for him, but his notoriously strange and picky eating habits made it extremely difficult. He was getting weaker every day, and everyone could see it and was worried. His wife, Laureen Powell, the members of Apple's board, and his close friend, Tim Cook, were all living in great pain. They watched him slipping into the abyss helplessly because Jobs himself refused to admit the seriousness of his illness. Finally, the doctors issued an ultimatum to him. His only way out was a liver transplant. This was an extremely cruel and paradoxical process. You had to be sick enough to get to the top of the transplant waiting list, but you also had to be strong enough to survive this dangerous major surgery. Jobs and his family started this endless race against death. By January 2009, Jobs' physical condition could no longer support his work. He made an extremely difficult decision for a man with such a strong control freak nature. He sent an open letter to all Apple employees announcing that he would take a 6-month sick leave. The daily operations of the company would be handed over to Tim Cook. This was the first time he publicly admitted his vulnerability to the world. In March 2009, the waiting finally paid off. In Tennessee, the liver of a young man who died in a car accident was a match for him. Jobs was immediately flown to the transplant center in Memphis by a private jet. The surgery was successful. When the doctors opened his abdomen, they found that the cancer cells had spread throughout his liver, and there were even metastatic spots on his peritoneum. This was a very bad sign, meaning that even if the transplant was successful, the risk of recurrence in the future was extremely high. Anyway, Jobs survived. He won this second-round battle and snatched his life back from the hands of death once again. When he woke up from the anesthesia and lay weakly in the hospital bed, he knew he had got a precious chance at a new life. But everyone knew very well that the enemy lurking in his body was only temporarily repelled and never eliminated. This war was far from over. In 2009, Steve Jobs won a precious second round in a battle with death. When he returned to Apple, he still looked thin, but his eyes were more focused and sharp. Everyone was wondering what his next product would be like for a man who had been to the brink of death. The answer was a device he had dreamed of for nearly a decade, even before the iPhone. Many people don't know that Apple's tablet project actually started earlier than the iPhone project. That amazing multi-touch screen was originally designed for the tablet. But to seize the opportunity in the mobile phone market, Jobs decided to put it in your pocket first. So, the iPhone was born, and the tablet project was put on hold. Now that the iPhone had been a huge success, Jobs thought it was time to revive that original dream. He had a grand theory called the post-PC era. He compared traditional personal computers to trucks. He said, "Trucks are useful, but most of us drive cars for our daily commute." He believed that for daily tasks like web browsing, emailing, and viewing photos and videos, bulky and complex computers were redundant. People needed a simpler, more intuitive, and more user-friendly car. Another thing that spurred him into action was the popular netbooks on the market at that time. Steep, underpowered plastic boxes with tiny keyboards and a terrible user experience made the perfection seeking Jobs sick. He was determined to create an elegant, powerful, and extremely user-friendly product to destroy this junk category and create a whole new market. The iPad was his answer. The R&D process was full of struggles. The core question was, what on earth was this thing for? It was caught between mobile phones and laptops. How could it prove its worth? If it was just a big iPod Touch, it was doomed to fail. To solve this problem, both Apple's software and hardware teams made crucial breakthroughs. First, the software. They couldn't simply stretch and enlarge iPhone apps. That would look terrible. So, they almost redesigned every core app for the iPad. For example, the email app used a split view layout, and the calendar app looked like a real desktop calendar. Every detail was aimed at making the most of that 9.7-inch screen to create a brand new immersive experience. Second, and most importantly, was the hardware core. Jobs knew that to achieve the performance and long battery life he wanted, he couldn't rely on external suppliers like Intel anymore. He made a strategic decision that would shape Apple's next decade: develop its own chips. Apple acquired a chip design company called PA and poured all its resources into creating the first Apple-designed processor for the iPad, the A4 chip. This powerful heart gave the iPad an unprecedentedly smooth experience in a thin and light body. Finally, the price. Jobs was fixated on a magical number, $499. He thought this price was the magic line that would turn the iPad from a nice to have into an impulse buy. The whole team was under his pressure, slashing costs like crazy to meet this price target. In January 2010, Jobs stepped back onto the familiar stage. He looked much better than before. The whole world was eager to see what this Apple tablet that had been rumored for years actually looked like. This time, his demonstration style was different. After introducing the iPad, instead of standing all the time, he walked to a comfortable black leather sofa in the middle of the stage, sat down, put his feet up, and started demonstrating the iPad leisurely on his lap. This carefully designed move sent a clear message. This wasn't a device for you to hunch over your desk with. It was a device for you to lean back and relax. He showed the world the magazine like iBooks, e-books, silky, smooth web browsing, and cinema like video experience. He announced that the starting price of this product was that incredible number, $499. He defined it as a magical, revolutionary device. However, after the launch, tech media and critics were generally disappointed, even mocking. They sneered that it was just a big iPod Touch, criticized it for having no USB port, no camera, and no flash support. All kinds of spoof pictures went viral on the internet. But 2 months later, when the iPad was officially released, consumers' reactions silenced all the critics. On the first day of release, the sales exceeded 300,000 units. In the first year, over 15 million units were sold. It became one of the most successful consumer electronics products in history. As it turned out, Jobs was right again. He created a product that people didn't know they needed until they had it, and then couldn't live without it. The success of the iPad not only brought huge profits to Apple, more importantly, it officially announced the arrival of the post-PC era that Jobs had predicted. Single-handedly, it created a brand new tablet market and forced all competitors to scramble to catch up. This light and elegant car has since driven into the digital lives of millions of households. With the birth of the iPad, the post-PC era arrived. Apple a company that was once on the verge of bankruptcy, now holds three aces: the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad, and has reached the pinnacle of the world. But Steve Jobs knew well that there's never been a smooth path under the throne. When your empire shines too brightly, former friends can turn into the most dangerous enemies, and every tiny mistake can trigger a huge wave. During Apple's toughest times, Google was its closest ally. Google's founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, regarded Jobs as their mentor. And Google's CEO, Eric Schmidt, was even a member of Apple's board. However, all this came to an abrupt end after Google launched the Android system. When Jobs first saw an Android phone, he was completely enraged. In his view, the rounded icons, the sliding operations, and even the multi-touch interaction were blatant, pixel-by-pixel copies of the iPhone. He felt deeply betrayed. At a meeting where the atmosphere was as cold as ice, Jobs roared at Google's executives. Then, Schmidt was forced to resign from Apple's board, marking the official split of the most important pair of allies in Silicon Valley history. They became sworn enemies. Jobs said to those around him that well-known menacing line, "I'm willing to spend my last breath and every cent Apple has in the bank to correct this mistake. I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen product. I'm ready to wage a thermonuclear war on it." This war was not just a business competition. It carried Jobs' strongest personal emotion: hatred for betrayal. If the fight against Google was a hot war, then the battle against Adobe was a cold war, a war of public opinion. Jobs always despised Adobe's Flash technology. In his eyes, this once ubiquitous animation and video plugin in the PC era was full of bugs, consumed a lot of resources, and often caused system crashes. He would never allow this junk software from a lazy company to appear on his perfect iPhone and iPad. So, he made a decision that shocked the industry. Apple's mobile devices would permanently and completely ban Flash. This meant that most video and interactive websites on the internet at that time couldn't be properly displayed on the iPhone. Immediately, criticism poured in. But Jobs didn't back down. Instead, he took the initiative. In April 2010, he personally wrote and published an open letter on Apple's official website called Thoughts on Flash. In this long article, he was like a calm surgeon, clearly and logically listing the 6 sins of Flash. From security, battery life, and performance to its damage to open web standards. This letter was the final straw that broke the camel's back for Flash. It successfully guided developers and public opinion and accelerated the popularization of open standards like. With just one manifesto, Jobs publicly executed an industry giant and won the battle. Just as Jobs was in the thick of his external wars, an unexpected internal crisis almost made him stumble. In June 2010, Apple released the iPhone 4 with its stunning glass body and stainless steel frame. However, this product, hailed as a work of art, had a fatal design flaw. When users held the phone in a certain way, the signal would sharply decline because their palms touched the gap in the frame antenna. This was the well-known antenna gate. Suddenly, media mockery and user complaints flooded in. Consumer Reports even unprecedentedly announced that it didn't recommend buying the iPhone 4. Apple's flawless brand name was in great danger. Jobs' first reaction was his usual arrogance and denial. In an email reply to a user, he wrote, "Just don't hold it that way." This statement only made the situation worse. Seeing that the crisis was about to get out of control, Jobs realized the seriousness of the problem. He urgently held a press conference. At the conference, he first showed a lot of data to prove that all smartphones had antenna problems. But at a crucial moment, he changed his tune and showed rare humility. He said, "We're not perfect, and the phone isn't either. We'll keep trying until we make it perfect." Then, he announced an unexpected solution. All iPhone 4 users would get a free $29 bumper case to solve the signal problem. This move instantly reversed public opinion. A huge public relations disaster was diffused by Jobs with the two tactics of admitting imperfection and free bumper cases. In that year, Jobs was fighting on 3 fronts simultaneously. He declared war on former allies, attacked outdated industry standards, and also fought against his company's mistakes. He was like a king defending his empire, powerful, irritable, and never compromising, but also knowing when to be practical and humble. These battles exhausted a great deal of his energy, and the demon in his body was waiting for the next chance to strike back. After a series of intense battles with the outside world, Steve Jobs' life entered a brand new stage. His health was deteriorating day by day, which made him focus more than ever on things that could transcend time and life itself. It was the warmth of the family, the inheritance of culture, and the grand blueprint he designed for Apple to fly into the future. In the final stage of his life, the cold and stubborn Jobs in the business world showed his soft side as a husband and a father. He started spending more time with his family, trying hard to mend the relationships that had been strained because of work. He was especially proud of his son, Reed. When Reed graduated from high school, although Jobs was very ill, he insisted on attending his son's graduation ceremony. Looking at Reed, he saw himself in his youth, smart, enthusiastic, with a sparkle in his eyes. He also attended a report meeting on Reed's cancer gene research project. When he saw his son speaking confidently on the stage, his pride was obvious. He was also trying to get closer to his 2 daughters. He would accompany his younger daughter, Eve, to the horse riding field to watch her practice equestrian, even though he knew nothing about it. He was worried about his older daughter, Erin, because of her sensitivity and introversion, and clumsily tried to communicate with her. At this stage, he was no longer just the world-changing CEO. He wanted to be a good, ordinary father. His wife, Laureen, was like a rock, supporting the whole family and his frail body. Beyond his family, Jobs poured his last enthusiasm into 2 things aimed at making Apple immortal. The first was to establish a university for Apple. He founded the Apple University and invited the dean of Yale School of Management to run it. The only purpose was to systematically pass on Apple's unique corporate culture, decision-making methods, and design philosophy. He was afraid that after his departure, Apple would lose its soul again, just like when he was ousted in 1985. The Apple University was the cultural vaccine he injected into the company. The second and the last product he devoted the most effort to was Apple's new headquarters building. He invited the world-renowned architect Norman Foster to design it together. His vision was extremely grand. He wanted to build a huge, perfect, circular glass building, like a spaceship landing in an artificial Eden. There were no strict offices, only open and fluid collaborative spaces, aiming to encourage chance encounters and exchanges. In June 2011, in his last public appearance, he dragged his sick body to the Council of Cupertino and passionately showed the blueprint of this spaceship to the council members. At that moment, he didn't look like a CEO. He was more like an architect defending his dream. This campus was a physical monument he left for Apple. Apart from culture and architecture, Jobs also established a key final strategy for Apple's future: iCloud. He keenly realized that the era of using Mac computers as the digital hub was over. In the future, the real hub would be in the cloud. The concept of iCloud was to achieve seamless and automatic data synchronization among all your devices: iPhone, iPad, Mac. Your photos, documents, and music would no longer be confined to any single device, but would flow freely in the cloud. It was an extremely complex project and a complete overhaul of the previously failed MobileMe service. The launch of iCloud officially announced that Apple's ecosystem had evolved from being hardware-centered to being cloud service-centered. This strategy ensured that Apple could still keep users firmly within its ecosystem in the next decade. Jobs' last time on the stage of a product launch was at the 2011 WWDC. He was thinner than ever and even staggered when walking. But when he spoke, his voice was still full of power. At that launch event, he personally announced the iCloud strategy and showed the world the grand plan of the spaceship headquarters. At the end of his speech, he did something unexpected. He invited core executives like Tim Cook and Joni Ive onto the stage one by one, and then stepped aside, giving all the applause and glory to them. At that moment, everyone understood. This was not just a product launch. It was a transfer of power, a silent farewell, and a symbolic ceremony of passing the torch to the next generation runners. In the last journey of his life, Jobs was no longer just fighting for the next quarter's financial report. He built a future that could fly into space and transcend infinity for his family, the company's century-long foundation, and the Apple empire he had dedicated his life to. Although he was about to leave the stage, he tried to engrave his soul in Apple's DNA forever.